President-elect Donald Trump calling for an expansion of America's nuclear arsenal, saying he's fine with an arms race as long as the U.S. is winning. Hello and welcome to Happening Now on this Friday. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Laura Ingle in for Jenna Lee. Mr. Trump started the nuclear conversation on Twitter saying, quote, the United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes.
That tweet came after Russian President Vladimir Putin promised to strengthen his nation's nuclear forces. And then Putin held his annual end-of-year news conference. We have live Fox team coverage with Kitty Logan from our London bureau. But we begin with Peter Doocy in West Palm Beach, Florida. Peter.
John, the president-elect right now is playing golf with Tiger Woods at the Trump International Golf Club in Palm Beach, not far away from Mar-a-Lago, where he stays down here. Woods apparently requested the game, according to transition officials. He's obviously one of the most famous athletes in the world, but Mr. Trump has a message for anybody trying to say that his upcoming inauguration is going to lack star power. He says this, quote, the so-called A-list celebrities are all wanting tickets to the inauguration, but look what they did for Hillary. Nothing. I want the people. The @RealDonaldTrump account has also been active with some policy-related posts in the last 24 hours. Mr. Trump expressed a desire to expand the U.S. nuclear arsenal, with his team later explaining that he is concerned not just about Russia, but also about terrorists and rogue nations. And Mr. Trump is also saying he's ready to move on from the notoriously expensive F-35 fighter jet program, tweeting that he wants Boeing to come up with an alternative. He did meet with Boeing and Lockheed CEOs earlier in the week. It seems the Boeing meeting went better than the Lockheed meeting. The president-elect also making a lot of decisions for somebody who has not been sworn in yet, and his newly minted press secretary, Sean Spicer, says he is not breaking protocol by not asking the president, who's in office right now, for permission.
No, he's the president-elect. He doesn't need to check with people, but I will say this. The President Obama and his team have been unbelievably gracious to the president-elect and his team. We respect the fact that there's one president at a time, but this president is not going to sit back and just wait for things to happen. He's going to get things done.
The Eric Trump Foundation has also just announced that it is going to stop fundraising because Eric Trump admits that some donors could be expecting special access to his dad, the next president. And now his dad, the next president, is weighing in on this. Also on Twitter, he says that he thinks his sons need to stop raising money for sick kids to avoid the possibility of a conflict of interest is a ridiculous shame. John.
All right. He always calls it like he sees it. Thanks very much, Peter Doocy. Well, President-elect Trump bringing several campaign staffers to the White House with him. In the meantime, he appeared to double down on his tweet about expanding America's nuclear arsenal. This morning, he spoke with MSNBC anchor Mika Brzezinski about it on the phone. Here's how the anchors characterized that conversation.
President-elect told you what?
Let it be an arms race. We will outmatch them at every pass.
And outlast them all.
And outlast them all.
So what about that characterization? I'm joined by political reporter Jonathan Swan. Is it an arms race that's imminent, Jonathan?
Well, I guess arms races begin with words, and that's certainly what Donald Trump is signaling at the moment. I think there's a couple of contextual things here. One is that he spent Wednesday with top military brass. A lot of these people have quite hawkish worldviews, and it's quite possible that Donald Trump is reflecting some of that input. And I think the second thing is Vladimir Putin made comments about upgrading his own nuclear arsenal. So I think Donald Trump sees it as imperative that the United States won't be pushed around.
His spokesman, Sean Spicer, issued something of a clarification. He said other countries need to be put on notice that he's not going to sit back and allow them to undermine our safety, our sovereignty. We're going to get into Sean Spicer's role in a minute, but is that a bit of clarification that is necessary to this particular story?
Well, this is sort of the problem when you're serving in a communications role for Donald Trump. I'm not talking about this comment specifically from Sean Spicer. I think the more interesting comments were actually from Kellyanne Conway last night and Jason Miller, where they tried to clarify the comments from Donald Trump as this is more of about modernising and upgrading. And then, of course, Donald Trump sort of undermines that by saying, no, I really do mean an arms race. I really do mean expansion. And that's a pattern of communication that we've seen throughout the campaign. So I think, when Sean Spicer takes the White House press secretary job, he's a very skilled operator, but he's going to have so many of these instances where he does some cleanup and then Donald Trump doubles down. It's just the way Donald Trump operates.
Well, some hawkish language from Donald Trump, but there's also been some hawkish language from Vladimir Putin.
No, that's exactly right. And that's why I said that's important context. Before Donald Trump issued that tweet, Vladimir Putin was saying things about upgrading Russia's nuclear arsenal. And that context has to be discussed when you discuss Donald Trump's tweet.
And as Ronald Reagan proved when he upgraded U.S. military forces and especially anti-nuclear forces, that is eventually what led to the demolition of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall.
Well, Donald Trump, has said that his philosophy is the Reagan peace through strength, and there have been a few consistencies in this campaign, and one of them has been the build-up of American military might, and not taking a backward step to any countries around the world.
All right, thanks very much, Jonathan Swan, political reporter, joining us this morning. Jonathan,
Pleasure.
Thanks.
And John, it is that time of year once again, time to keep your cool while traveling home or wherever you're going. You know it's going to be busy, especially with some wicked weather threatening some regions. So what's the secret to a smooth trip?
Go early. Yes, I go early. That's my method.
You definitely have to come early and just be mentally prepared to stand in line and wait.
Well, and in uncertain times, too, it's important to remember the history of this holiday season and why it's important to keep Christmas traditions alive. And you may not have this on your calendar, but today is expected to be the busiest travel day of the holiday season, and travelers still feeling the ripple effects after hundreds of flights were canceled at Los Angeles International Airport yesterday. It was a mess, and more expected today. Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt is live at LAX. He's not a mess. He's looking dapper and looking for those holiday travelers. Jonathan, what can you tell us?
Thanks, Laura. It could be a whole lot better here, but it could certainly be a whole lot worse. Some 173 flights expected to be delayed here through noon Pacific time at LAX. That's a significant percentage of the 630 delays across the entire country. So it's tough for travelers, but they are getting there. I would say the lines at the moment, at least getting to the aircraft through check-in and security, are no worse than they are on any other Friday here at LAX. And the advice to travelers from officials here and indeed across the country is come prepared. Listen here.
If you're checking the conditions at the airport even before you leave your home, check to see what the roads are like, how crowded it is. Make sure you print your boarding pass. Check to see if your flight's been delayed or canceled. That way, before you even come to the airport, you've got some sense of how much time you need to get to the airport.
Now, it's significant that the majority of the delays here at LAX are on arrivals, and that gives you an indication that it is weather across other parts of the country that is causing problems. So there are delays at many airports, and there are significant frustrations for holiday travelers. Listen again.
Yeah, I think it's definitely really crazy. I wasn't expecting so many people.
Pretty much all the flights are oversold, and they're offering, money for people to take later flights and whatnot.
You definitely have to come early and just be mentally prepared to stand in line and wait.
Now, bottom line here at LAX, at least, Laura, it's not as bad as it could be, but we are expecting more bad weather here later, so things could get worse. Remember, nobody in LA can drive in the rain. It seems pilots can't necessarily taxi properly either. That was the cause of most of the delays yesterday. It was drizzle.
Yes, and I remember living in Los Angeles when you and I worked together there at the LA Bureau. You're right. When it rains there, things kind of go sideways. So good luck to you again.
It all falls apart.
All right, Jonathan,
Thanks,
of course, LAX. Thanks.
It's been 149 days now since President-elect Trump has held a traditional news conference. Well, now his incoming press secretary, Sean Spicer, just named yesterday, giving some new details on how the Trump White House will deal with the press. While the president-elect uses social media to reach the American people directly, our media panel reacts next.
It is absolutely fascinating, and it makes every day, every hour, just unbelievable, because you know that you're having that conversation with the American people, and they can have it back with him. When people are wrong, he's going to hold them accountable, and he's going to correct the record. So it's going to be he has used Twitter more effectively and social media between Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
That was incoming White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer, as it's now been 149 days since President-elect Trump has held a traditional news conference. But senior advisor Kellyanne Conway says there will be daily press briefings in the Trump administration. There had been some question about that. Let's talk about it with Lynn Sweet, Washington bureau chief of the Chicago Sun-Times. Are you heartened that the daily press briefing is not going to go the way of the dinosaur sure. in the Trump administration?
Sure, and happy holiday, John, by the way, and to everyone out there. I think it's great. What we don't know, though, is will it be televised? Mike McCurry, who is Bill Clinton's press secretary, who started the televised press briefings, has said through the years that he thought it's a bad idea. So we don't know, will it be televised, how long it will be. But I take them at their word. If they have something daily and if the reporters can have a chance to get questions answered, that's great.
Bill Clinton used to hold the record for the president-elect who had gone the longest without an actual news conference, 9 days. It's been, as we mentioned, 148 since Donald Trump held a news conference. He hasn't had a formal news conference since he was elected. What do you think about that?
Well, since July, what I think about it, I'm a reporter. Of course, I like him to have a press conference. There's so many questions to ask. He promised to have one December 15th to talk about how he would divorce himself from his business holdings. Now he said that's in January. So, press conferences could be long, could be short. You could set them up in a variety of formats. But I guess, John, you should do something. And when you have nothing, that's a long time. And I'm hoping now that he has his press team in place, that they figure out a way to have President-elect and then President Trump available on a more routine basis. But yes, of course, 149 days is too long. But whatever that number is, 149 days is too much.
Let's add to the conversation Judy Miller, our Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter and a Fox News contributor as well. Kellyanne Conway, Judy, was on GMA this morning and talked a little bit about press availability in the incoming Trump administration. She, of course, was his campaign manager, who's just been named counselor to the president. Listen to what she had to say.
This will be a traditional White House in the sense that you will have a great deal of press availability on a daily basis, and you'll have a president who continues to be engaged with the press.
The current administration, Judy, as you well know, promised to be the most transparent in history. That hasn't exactly happened. What are you looking forward to under a Trump administration?
Well, I'm looking for more transparency, as is Lynn. I'm looking for more access. And I'm certainly looking for something beyond Donald Trump's favorite communication style, which is the tweet. I mean, it's one thing for him to say, I'm not going to give up DTS, as he calls it, drain the swamp. But it's another to be able to actually ask him a question. And that's very, very important. And it's something that President Obama did not like to do. And I think, by the way, it did not serve him well that he did so relatively few press conferences. So I think that Donald Trump, who has made his mark as a kind of master of media manipulation, will continue to find interesting ways of getting his message across. I wonder whether or not this is going to be a huge role reversal of a White House press secretary actually correcting us rather than us holding them accountable for errors and misstatements of fact.
I don't want to denigrate what we do in the media, but Donald Trump's position is that going straight to the American people through without a filter, as he does via Twitter, that is more beneficial. Judy, what's your reaction?
Look, I think it's a means of communication, but I'm sorry, I believe in the First Amendment, as do you, John, and you, Lynn, and I think most people who look at our checks and balance system. And I think that the press is an indispensable element in a democracy, and that Donald Trump may not like that any more than any other president, and that he will not be unusual, but that's our job. We've got to stick to it. He can have his say, but we will surely have ours. And if you've seen the coverage so far, it has been very skeptical. It's pointed out that the man who promised to bring different people into the government has now selected a cabinet of the 1%. That is the richest people we've ever had in government. Let's see how it works. But he's not going to stop, and we're not going to stop. And it'll be interesting.
The guy he has chosen to be his press secretary is somewhat familiar to the American people, having essentially held that same job for the Republican National Committee. I'm talking about Sean Spicer, newly named to that position. He was on with Maria Bartiromo this morning on Fox Business Network. Here's what he had to say about communications with the American people going forward. Listen.
We've got one in January that we're going to do. We've already announced it.
Okay.
And I know, but look, I don't think the American people are sitting around saying, when is he going to have a formal press conference? He speaks very frequently and forcefully on Twitter. He has been interviewed numerous times. He's going to continue to speak out often.
I suppose the American people aren't sitting around wondering when the next presidential news conference is, Lynn, but I certainly know the press corps is.
Well, there's a lot to running the country. And there's a lot of questions that you have that often, this is what reporters do. You think of things in the multiple areas of government to talk about. That's what you could address in the press conference without, if the president-elect clearly is going to continue to communicate in Twitter. The Obama White House did. Snapchat, Instagram, blogs. They have tools, but it doesn't mean that you exempt the press, or carve them out from communicating. I just think it's the whole package. I'm really encouraged by what Sean and Kellyanne said. Looking ahead, there's no reason to think today that if everyone's operating out of good faith, that the president-elect won't have the ability to communicate directly, which President Obama, First Lady Michelle use direct communications all the time. Sometimes, John and Judy, I feel like I have to sign up for everything just to keep up with what a White House puts out.
Yeah.
Because they don't always tell you. We have sent out a picture that's important over Twitter. And you think, heck, why didn't someone send me an email?
Yes, it is tough.
So it's a lot to keep track of. But I think, I'm very encouraged by what Sean and Kellyanne said. And with all the contentious relationship that's ongoing with the press, if they want to do a reset, fine with me. Let's just move forward and have access. They have their ability to communicate. Give us our ability to ask questions and get some answers.
A lot of presidents have battled with the press, and it's a healthy thing in our republic.
It could still
Lynn
be
Sweet,
but
Judy
at
Miller.
least, let us, yeah.
Thank you both.
Hey, thank
Happy
you.
holidays,
Merry
John.
Christmas. Thanks. A Fox News alert, and President-elect Donald Trump has released a new statement on relations with Russia. Trump saying in that statement, a very nice letter from Vladimir Putin. His thoughts are so correct. I hope both sides are able to live up to these thoughts, and we do not have to travel an alternate path. That comes in response to a letter from Mr. Putin that Mr. Trump attached to the statement. Here is a portion of that. It reads in part, quote, I hope that after you assume the position of President of the United States of America, you will be able, by acting in a constructive and pragmatic way, to take real steps to restore the framework of bilateral cooperation in different areas, as well as bring our level of collaboration on the international scene to a qualitatively new level. So, there you go. New ways of communicating under President-elect Trump.
And the president-elect hasn't taken office, but he's busy enough. Yesterday, appointing a new communications team, and they were immediately pressed to explain their boss's remarks about boosting America's nuclear arsenal. Well, today, he hit the golf course with Tiger Woods. He's been very busy. Mr. Trump promising to do a lot in his first 100 days, like repealing the Affordable Care Act, reworking trade deals, securing funding for a border wall, and imposing term limits on Congress, and much, much more. So here's Joe Trippi, former Howard Dean campaign manager and Fox News contributor, along with Scott Jennings, former special assistant to President George W. Bush. Welcome to you, gentlemen. All right, we have a lot to talk about. Joe, I want to start with you. President-elect Trump's latest tweet obviously causing some waves about the strengthening our nuclear capabilities. But I want to ask you about the big picture. His first 100 days, repealing Obamacare, reworking those trade deals, building the wall, and of course his promise to begin the very fast, I think he used the word very 3 times, removal of more than 2 million criminal illegal immigrants in his first hour of being in office. So how realistic is all of this, Joe?
It's as realistic as his ability to keep the Republicans in the Senate, for the most part, aligned with his agenda. Because first of all, the first 100 days are critical. It is the period where he's going to be at his strongest to get things done. The first term and the first 2 years of the first term are, but the first 100 days setting that agenda. But the problem for him is, can he hold McCain on an issue? Can he hold Rubio on his immigration policy? It's about holding, because there's only a couple of vote margin for Republicans in the U.S. Senate. Democrats don't have really the possibility. They can delay things, but stopping them, that's going to happen because he loses 2 or 3 votes. And a lot of these controversial things he wants to get done could lose him a Collins in Maine, or a McCain from Arizona, or a Lindsey Graham, for instance. So, can he hold it together? If he can't, he's going to be able to get most of his agenda, most of that 100 days. It may get protests out there, but Democrats are going to be tough to stop it.
And Scott, when we look back at what President Obama's first 100-day plans included in his first run, there were also some big ticket items to get to, like the economic stimulus package. In February of 2009, he presented plans for more troops in Afghanistan. Now, these plans and promises are usually pretty big. How do you think Trump stack up?
Well, he does have a lot of big goals, and the American people in the election results rejected the concept of incrementalism. The American people for the last 6 years have seen the policy movement in this country grind to a halt under divided government, so they unified government under Republican control, and they want Trump to move his agenda. On top of the policy issues that he's fighting for, which are big and complex, he also has a government to build. And so the United States Senate, in addition to moving things like Obamacare repeal, has to spend a lot of time on confirming cabinet secretaries and, the biggie, confirming a Supreme Court justice. So if he gets some of the big executive action things done that he can do on day one, he gets the beginning of movement on passing legislation that he wants to pass, and he starts to build a government and confirm a Supreme Court justice, that would be a huge 100 days, and I think the people would feel satisfied that we're no longer at business as usual in Washington.
Right. And Joe, Mr. Trump has moved at a pretty good pace to select his people, including getting his communications team in place. So I want to ask you, what do you make of his picks?
Look, a lot of them are going to be controversial, going to have, hearings, the ones particularly that need Senate confirmation, I think, but I think the most of them are going to get through. Again, it's his ability to hold Republicans in the Senate. The House Republicans have a big enough majority that he can lose 10, 20 members from the Republican side and still have the House pass his agenda. The critical thing is, I actually think it's Senators McCain, Graham, some of Collins in Maine are going to be critical to him, much more critical than his loyalists in the Senate. Because if he loses some of them, or Rubio on his immigration, or some of his, or the infrastructure spending, in any of these things, if he loses 2 or 3 Republican votes, he's not going to get that part of his agenda, won't get passed. So, and his loyalists are going to be with him on everything. So the people he has to pay the most attention to tend to be the people he's been, in a lot of ways, the meanest to in terms of his tweets and things. So it's going to be interesting if he can hold that all together.
Right, and that's what we're saying. The communications team that's in place now, getting in place, is going to be very busy in the days to come. So I need to leave it there. Joe Trippi and Scott Jennings, thank you both so much for being here today. Have a great holiday.
Good to be with you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Nice music there. The Berlin terror attack that left 12 people dead targeted a cultural institution. The terrorists chose a Christmas market and all it symbolizes. And it got us thinking about the history of the holiday here and around the world and why it is so important to keep traditions alive. So Bob Richter, our friend here, has literally written the book on Christmas. There it is on your screen. He is an antiques dealer, designer, and the author of A Very Vintage Christmas. Bob Richter joins us now. Thank you so much for coming in on this very important day.
Thank you.
And bringing some good props. So as we are looking at your props, first I want to ask you to tell us about the history of Christmas. We, of course, know the reason for the season. But in terms of the actual celebration itself, I think a lot of people might be surprised to know that it hasn't actually been going on as long as we might have thought.
Well, exactly. I mean, 100 years ago, only 1 in 5 households were celebrating Christmas the way we see it now.
Mm-hmm.
People didn't have Christmas trees and ornaments. That's a 20th century invention.
Right. Let's talk about what you have here behind us. You're a very vintage Christmas. You've got some vintage items here. Some of them will probably look familiar to some of our viewers. What do you got?
Well, let's start with the ornaments.
Okay.
Ornaments, lights, and decorations are all over my book. Most ornaments that came into this country were from Germany. These ornaments are special because when World War II broke out, guess what? Americans didn't want German ornaments anymore.
Right.
So enter the Shiny Bright Corporation. And these ornaments, just so Americans would know that they were American, feature Uncle Sam shaking hands with Santa.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Right there. And most people recall these ornaments in their attic, and you can still find them out there today at flea markets and garage sales and estate sales and all over the place. I certainly had them.
Right. They are beautiful, and I think a lot of people do actually remember them. Christmas is important for so many people around the world, right? Obviously, we know this for religious and sentimental reasons, but what do you think is the number one reason that people wait for Christmas? What is it that brings us together?
You know, we all get a pass at Christmas time to be just a little bit sentimental.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
And these objects open up a floodgate of memories. They're emotional, and I really think they're conduits for connectivity. It connects us, and it adds continuity to our lives. Oh, remember this Christmas when we did this, or when we unpacked the ornaments? It's like visiting old friends.
It is.
And it really is, because, oh my gosh, my Aunt Peggy gave me that. Or remember this was on our first Christmas tree. Oh wow, this is an old one. This one belonged to Grandma.
Just had that conversation yesterday in my house with my mother bringing an ornament that was on our aunt and uncle's tree, and it did bring back a lot of memories. But a lot of people aren't so fortunate to have the family memories, and they're alone this year, and we always hear that. So what can people who may not be so fortunate do to either have a tradition, start their own tradition, get involved with somebody else's?
Well, the best way I know how to feel better any time of the year is to give of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you're feeling low at Christmas time, it's a great time to volunteer, to give away something that means something to you, that has history.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of times people bemoan the fact that they didn't get their parents' ornaments.
Right.
Head out to a flea market or any number of antique shops, and they have old ornaments there. And you can buy one like your parents used to have. Bring back some memories, tell others about them, and in a way, these people stay alive through these conduits for connectivity.
I have a feeling that Christmas is on your mind year round. So what is your favorite, what's kind of a top thing that you look forward to that we can all incorporate into our home? Because I think a lot of us are decorating, trying to get everything ready for the weekend. Is there anything that we can do to add a little more festive punch to our house?
Well, I think the first thing we can do is put down our cell phones and other handheld devices.
I like that.
Beep and ring and text and bleep, and spend time with each other. Do some old-fashioned visiting. Have people over to your home. Go visit them. I grew up in a neighborhood where, the neighbors would bring cookies and we would take cookies to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday my doorbell rang and I just expected it was a neighbor who wanted something, and it was carolers. Carolers in this day and age. It made me so happy. I say sing Christmas carols, visit with people, spend time. Now's the time when, everything else can wait until next year.
You're right on that.
Be with your family. Be with your friends.
I think a lot of people will resonate with that message. Thank you so much for sharing it with us today.
My pleasure.
And we want to thank Bob Richter. And obviously, you want to pick up his book, A Very Vintage Christmas.
That's right.
Makes a lot of sense right about now. And decorate your home. Thanks for the tips.
Thanks, Laura.
All right.
A close call in the skies over Southern California. Air traffic control apparently misdirected the crew of an EVA Airlines 777. sending that jumbo jet in the wrong direction. Instead of heading west from Los Angeles Airport toward the ocean and its destination of Taiwan, the jet was turned east toward a mountain range and into the flight path of another airplane. It took more than a minute for the tower to get the jet to respond to instructions and change course. Eventually, it did land safely in Taiwan, but reportedly it came very close to the mountains. So how do we keep near disasters like this from happening? I'm joined by J.P. Tristani, an aviation consultant, former commercial airline pilot. You've listened to the ATC, the air traffic control recordings of this particular incident. What do you think went wrong here?
Just about everything that could go wrong for contributory factors in causing an accident was going wrong. You had a failure in communications between the pilot and the ATC. You had an English language understanding problem from people who don't speak the native tongue. You also had a very poor situational awareness of pilots that seemed to forget there was a mountain range out there.
Yeah, at one point I heard the controller saying, the EVA jetliner had been sent on a course of 090, which is due east, and the ATC controller says turn left to a heading of 270. It didn't make any sense.
The ATC controller was also using other non-standard protocol for communications. In essence, she said at one point in time, turn southbound. What is southbound? 190 degrees, 165 degrees, what is it? That is a non-standard type of turn. ATC always defines turn right, heading of, but you don't just say southbound, turn westbound, turn east, turn south. And in that ATC conversation, you find that ATC controller doing that, using non-standard terminology. To a person that English is not their native language, that translation coming through and you hear it, and the pilot's saying, left, right, which way is my turn?
Well, fortunately, there were no casualties, but they came within apparently 500 feet of hitting Mount Wilson there, as you saw on that map. Pretty scary stuff. J.P. Tristani, we have to say goodbye. J.P., thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Back in just a moment with more. After condemning the Berlin terror attack this week, President-elect Trump suggests he's ready to move ahead with a plan to temporarily suspend immigration from Muslim countries tied to terror. Let's bring in Dan Henninger, deputy editorial page editor for The Wall Street Journal. Donald Trump said that he has been proven 100% correct, that the kind of Muslim immigration ban that he has asked for in this country is the kind of thing that they should be addressing in Europe. What are your thoughts on that, Daniel?
Well, I think, John, that with Donald Trump, one of the things we're all trying to do is understand his operating method, his modus operandi. And I don't know that he necessarily means that he would impose a total ban on immigrants from Muslim countries. But I think what he is really trying to do is to force these national security bureaucracies, whether in the United States or in Europe, to act, to focus on coming up with a plan to minimize the threat. You know, bureaucracies, it's not as though they're out there doing nothing, but they aren't doing enough, and they're sort of engulfed in the politics of their country, the politics of the United States, and they move slowly. And I think Trump is trying to get their attention, saying, listen, you people have got to come up with a plan to suppress and minimize this threat, or I will do something draconian like imposing a total ban. It is, in a sense, an incentive to get the people who are supposed to protect us to get moving on doing that.
There's a fascinating nugget about this Anis Amri, the guy who apparently drove his truck into that Berlin marketplace and then was killed overnight in that shootout with police in Milan. German police had him under covert surveillance for 6 months. They'd been trying to deport him after his asylum application was rejected, but they were unable to do so because he lacked valid identity papers, and Tunisia initially denied that he was a citizen. Now, that goes right to the heart of what Trump has been talking about, President-elect Trump. The fact that you just don't know who many of these people are who are coming across the border.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's a lot of legal reasons out there for why Germany acted the way they did. They're restricted by their own laws. And Trump, I think, is trying to say you have to revisit some of those laws. We have one of our own, John. Last year we passed the USA Freedom Act in 2015, which restricted the ability of American telephone companies to create metadata, all this information about telephone calls, bulk telephone calls. They're no longer able to hold that sort of thing. I think what Trump is going to say is we need an A to Z review of the policies we have in place, of the laws we passed, like that one, to try to come to grips with whether we are adequately protecting the American people. Because if you, the legislatures, and the bureaucracies won't do it, I will do it unilaterally. I think that's what he's trying to tell us.
Well, and when you look at his cabinet appointments, typically, I mean, look at Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, somebody who has run large organizations. That's what he's trying to do, to sort of turn the ship around, find people who have run effectively large organizations?
Yeah, that's what businessmen like Rex Tillerson have done. You mentioned Carl Icahn to sort of take a look at regulations in the United States. I believe Trump's bringing these businessmen in because they have had the experience you're describing. They have worked with large bureaucracies, private bureaucracies. I mean, can you imagine how big Exxon is? And these are men and women who understand how to drive these large institutions, how to incentivize them to act. Now, with the public bureaucracies in Washington, it's extraordinarily difficult. But what I think Trump is saying is, I've got to step outside the current mold. I cannot try to appoint people who've been working inside these bureaucracies, who are used to the way they work, who've become kind of inured to their slowness. He wants people to come in from the outside, like Rex Tillerson, who are going to shake it up.
Interesting. Daniel Henninger from the Wall Street Journal. Daniel, thanks very much.
Thank you, John.
And there are new aggressions from China, what it's doing in the South China Sea, that is raising alarms with U.S. intelligence agencies. Plus, a potentially dangerous shortage for the U.S. Air Force amid increasing challenges overseas. What it's saying about the pilots who help keep us all safe. A senior Israeli official now accusing President Obama of colluding with the Palestinians in what the unnamed official calls a, quote, shameful move against Israel at the UN, after the White House failed to voice opposition to a Security Council resolution condemning settlement construction in the West Bank. The White House so far has not said how it will vote on the resolution, which may happen today after being postponed yesterday.
Breaking news this hour of Happening Now as U.S. officials tell Fox News Beijing has sent new surface-to-air missiles to the South China Sea. Our Lucas Tomlinson is live at the Pentagon with more. Lucas, what's that all about?
Well, John, breaking right now, U.S. intelligence satellites have spotted new Chinese weaponry, surface-to-air missiles on Hainan Island in the South China Sea. Now, Hainan Island is not one of China's contested islands. It's a province, belongs to China. However, the intelligence community believes that these missiles will soon be going to the Spratly chain of islands in the South China Sea. That would mark the first time that missiles had ever gone to the Spratlys. So far, in the last few weeks, gun emplacements have been seen on all 7 of China's artificial islands in the South China Sea. In the last 2 years, China has built up 3,000 acres of artificial islands, added 3 runways, and bomber flights have occurred throughout the South China Sea. In fact, a week ago, China flew a long-range nuclear-capable bomber days after President-elect Donald Trump's call with his Taiwan counterpart. Now, just moments ago, I spoke to a former head of U.S. Air Force intelligence, and he reacted to this latest Chinese provocation.
This is just another example of the adventurism and aggressiveness of the Chinese in the face of, quite frankly, an anemic and feckless set of policies that we've seen over the last 8 years.
Now, to counter this Chinese threat, the head of the U.S. Air Force says he needs 30,000 more airmen. Just over the summer, he said he was 700 pilots and 4,000 mechanics short. But now the top uniformed Air Force officer, General David Goldfein, says, quote, the shortage of people has fundamentally changed the way we do business in terms of the operational risk day to day. John, he wants these additional airmen to perform a variety of tasks, including bolstering the nuclear force, cyber, space, the drones. At the start of the Afghan war in 2001, there was one drone orbiting over the battlefield. Today, there's over 60, and they are flying fiberglass. They need Air Force personnel to be able to take in the feeds and the reconnaissance. Now, at the start of the Gulf War, the Air Force had 134 fighter squadrons. 2 decades later, they're down to 55. Yet the Air Force has conducted 70% of the bombing missions against ISIS over the skies of Iraq and Syria. Air Force refueling tankers are also providing 90% of all the gas to all the fighter jets flying overhead, as well as the bombers. Now, the Air Force is not alone when it comes to rebuilding its force. The Navy, in a new study commissioned by the Secretary of the Navy says they need 30% more ships. Right now, the U.S. Navy is at 273 ships. A new study says they need to grow the force by 3 to 355 ships. Now, the vanguard of that effort will be attack submarines. Just over the summer, the head of the U.S. Pacific Command, Admiral Harry Harris, said that he needs more attack submarines, like this submarine you see here, a Los Angeles-class attack boat out of Pearl Harbor. He says he needs these submarines to keep watch over the Chinese and also counter the growing Chinese military threat. Now, the Army and Marine Corps have also expressed a desire, John, to increase their forces as well. The new $600 billion defense bill passed over President Obama's objections addresses these manpower shortages. John?
All of our military services really are at force levels that haven't been seen in decades. They are that low, generations even. Lucas Tomlinson. Lucas, thank you.
Despite President Obama's strong victories in 2008 and 2012, the Democratic Party has lost enormous political ground over the last 8 years. Whatever the leadership of the Democratic Party has been doing over the last many years has failed, and we need fundamental change.
All right, that was Bernie Sanders last week on the future of the Democratic Party. And today, the Wall Street Journal suggesting that some of the DNC are now blaming President Obama for the problems plaguing the Democratic Party. The newspaper writing, quote, "Since the president's election in 2008, Democrats lost control of Congress and suffered even steeper losses in state capitals, where they hold a minority of governorships and have lost control in dozens of state legislative chambers." Joining me now to discuss all this, Mark Larson, a conservative Southern California radio host, and Julian Epstein, former chief counsel for the House Judiciary Committee and former staff director of the House Government Reform Committee. I wonder if that all fits on a business card, but I'm so glad that you are here with us, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Julian, I want to start with you. So you heard Bernie Sanders there. The Democrats have lost a lot of ground in the past 2 elections. They lost the White House. They didn't retake the Senate. And things look bleak for them in 2018 there. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, they look pretty bad right now. And I think the first thing you do is you try to diagnose where the problem is and not where the problem isn't. I don't think anybody can realistically blame this on President Obama. His approval ratings are 55, 56%. His coalition was the coalition that Hillary Clinton could not hold on to, primarily white working class voters and black turnout. And that is not Obama's fault. That is the fault, I think, of the Hillary Clinton campaign. And I think the second point here that Bernie Sanders is properly making is that the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, has not made the necessary investments in the infrastructure to get gains at the state level with governorships and state legislatures. And I think they also have not had the right message, as Hillary Clinton, I don't think, had the right message, which is that this economy is not working for most people, particularly working class people, and the power structure isn't working for most people, particularly working class people. So it's going to be the job now of the DNC and the next candidates to kind of get right on the message and get right on the investment on the infrastructure. That's not a problem that you lay at the doorstep of Barack Obama. It's a problem you can blame Hillary Clinton's campaign for and the last DNC chair, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, but certainly not President Obama.
Now, Mark, the House remains firmly in GOP control. It's even worse at the state House level. So does President Obama share some of the blame on that front?
Of course he does.
Sure he does. Hillary, I'll agree with Julian that Hillary had her own problems, and Bernie's people are still upset and should be. And the DNC is caught up in a river of denial, whether it's Donna Brazile or Debbie Wasserman Schultz or what have you. But a lot of this was a referendum on Obama. Before this fake news controversy, fake news, there was fake hope. There were people who bought every promise that he had. It was going to be magical. The seas were going to stop their rise. The temperatures of the earth were going to go down. Now the legacy is being repolished here. It was a referendum on him as well as her. Now, that said, Republicans have to learn from this too, because Obama was in many ways a victim in the stuff that didn't work. Because some stuff, you can make the case, some things worked, but plenty is coming unraveled. Obamacare, a lot of things still coming home to roost. But he was a victim of his own hubris and that sort of false promises or overly promising. Hillary did the same thing. Bernie certainly did. But Trump could overpromise too when he said the other day that I will never let you down. Well, human beings are human beings. So that's a problem too. But there are Obama fingerprints on this too.
Right.
And they keep changing the layout of the library because the legacy is shifting.
Okay, Julian, I want to go back to what the Wall Street Journal reported today. The top candidates to lead the Democratic National Committee are suggesting that President Obama left the party weakened. Is that a fair statement? His approval numbers, as I think you mentioned, are actually pretty good right now. The Daily Gallup approval is at 56%.
I think that's right, at 56%, and I think that most people think that if Obama were on the ticket in the last election, he would have won because he showed the ability to kind of carry the white working class vote in very significant numbers, better numbers than certainly Hillary Clinton did. Black turnout, Hispanic turnout, all of the other kind of parts of that Obama coalition, he showed an enormous ability to carry that. So I think these kind of backhanded swipes at the outgoing president are kind of feeble. I think they're misplaced. And I just don't think that kind of gets you anywhere in the conversation. I think the new Democratic Party is going to have to, as some of the critics point out, reinvest in the state apparatus. That's the point where I think in the last 8 years the Democrats have really failed. If you want to lay some blame at Obama's doorstep, that might be the only place you could. The infrastructure in the states have not been properly invested in, and that's really kind of got to change. I think the Democratic message, I think Democrats have to embrace populism, but the right kind of populism. I think the overemphasis on identity politics was a mistake for the Democrats. I think to the extent that it certainly kind of eclipsed the discussion about a more economic type of populism. And I think the Democrats also kind of have to focus on the new administration. Is Donald Trump really going to bring the kind of change that people are looking for? And I suspect that a lot of working class voters are going to be pretty disappointed. They're going to say pretty soon, this is not the change I was looking for. It looks like in Washington with the appointments right now, it's business as usual. It's the same old crowd, and it's the kind of economic policies that aren't going to really do much for working class
Gotta
people.
leave it there.
I think
Mark?
Democrats are going to have an opportunity to capitalize on that, particularly when you combine that with all the conflicts of interest in this new administration.
Good Donald Trump, Julian.
Mark and Julian, I have to leave it there. I have to leave it there, guys. Thank you so much. Thanks for being with us today. We'll see you next time.
Merry Christmas.
Germany's largest bank agreeing to a $7 billion settlement with the U.S. Justice Department to end civil claims over its role in the 2008 financial crisis. Fox Business Network's Adam Shapiro is live from the New York Stock Exchange. Hi, Adam. What do you got there?
Well, this is a pretty major settlement. I mean, $7.2 billion. It's not as much as the U.S. government initially said they were going to go after Deutsche Bank for, but still, $7.2 billion is a huge amount of money. And it raises the question of whether this bank, whose stock, by the way, their stock is up today, is going to have to go out and raise capital. And it's not just Deutsche Bank. Credit Suisse, that bank as well, has settled with the U.S. government. So this all goes back to the financial collapse of 2007, 2008, and the devious procedures that the banks use to sell mortgage-backed securities to unsuspecting clients. At the end of the day, here's what everyone is paying in fines to make good on the bad behavior. Deutsche Bank is going to be paying $7.2 billion, Credit Suisse, $5.3 billion. And when you look at what all the U.S. banks like J.P. Morgan, Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo, what they've all had to pay in fines, it's totaling $46 billion. It sounds like an enormous amount of money. It is, but don't forget the financial collapse wiped out trillions of dollars, not only in home equity for average Americans, but for investors worldwide. Laura, back to you.
All right, Adam, thanks so much for that. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Thanks.
An internet so-called celebrity kicked off a Delta Airlines flight is defending himself, insisting the video he made was not a prank or a hoax. Adam Saleh said he and a friend were escorted off the plane because he was overheard speaking Arabic on his phone to his mother, and somebody complained. Other passengers, though, disagree, saying he started the whole thing.
He stood up and started shouting, putting his fist in the air, shouting something that sounded really Arabic. For no reason, sat down. A few minutes passed and then he was up again, doing it again. He did it 3 times, till eventually people said, no, we're not happy with this.
People were crying. They felt so uncomfortable because it felt awkward. It was really uncomfortable. There wasn't fear. It was just uncomfort. It was like, why is this happening in today's world?
Delta issued a statement saying Saleh and his buddy tried to disrupt the cabin with provocative behavior. Saleh later claimed that was not the case.
While we're in there and getting accused and people telling us, oh, they need to leave right now, me and him felt like we were terrorists. This was not a prank, no prank at all.
Let's take it up with our legal panel. Fred Tisi is a former federal prosecutor, Richard St. Paul, a former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney. It might not have been an issue, Fred, if this guy didn't have a previous history of trying to stoke racially tinged events and then film them for YouTube.
Correct. I mean, I think you're being extremely generous when you say this guy's some kind of a YouTube celebrity. Like, that's almost a kind of an oxymoron. But putting that aside, here's the problem with this whole story. Delta, to their credit, dispatched this aircraft. This airplane was flying from London to JFK. When the airplane landed, they put a team on. They put a crew on. They interviewed all the passengers. They interviewed the flight crew, and they were all pretty straightforward and pretty consistent in their story that this guy made the whole thing up. So, the law does not protect the inanely stupid. This guy really needs kind of a, I don't want to say a spanking, but he does need to be punished.
Richard, is that possible? I mean, could the airline bring some kind of charges against him, whether criminal or civil?
No, it's unlikely that he'll face any criminal charges. What happens typically is that the airline would hand you over to the police, whoever the police, whether it's in London or JFK, wherever he landed, and there they will be in charge of prosecuting. This question for Delta is clear in the air, and whether or not Delta racial profiles. There have been other incidences on Delta and other airlines where people were kicked off because of certain ethnicities, or just recently you heard in JetBlue where a guy was yelling at Ivanka Trump and he was kicked off. The primary concern here is passenger safety. You want to deal with something on the ground and not 30,000 feet in the air. So if there is a disturbance, the airline is going to step in and take care of the disturbance on the ground and not 30,000 feet in the air. And as long as they're reasonable, they're protected from civil liability.
Let's talk about that Ivanka Trump incident, Fred. Ivanka Trump, her husband, her 3 kids get on a JetBlue flight for a flight to San Francisco. 2 guys come on who are married, and they apparently don't like Ivanka Trump, or they really don't like her father, and start screaming at her that her father is ruining the country. Now, they, too, were taken off the JetBlue flight. They're complaining about it, saying that they were, denied their First Amendment rights, essentially. Do they have a case?
No, they don't have a case at all in any way, shape, or form. Quite frankly, it was very unfortunate what they did. I mean, their marital status is completely irrelevant to this. What is relevant to this is the way they conducted themselves on this aircraft. Now, you got to remember something, John. You have a lot of people who fly on these airlines who are afraid to fly. I mean, you're a pilot, I'm a pilot. We've been flying for 30 years. We love getting on airplanes. I mean, that to me is the best part of the day. But there's a lot of people who are afraid to fly. And the fact of the matter is that these people were very loud and very obnoxious. And I find it very troubling that because of their quote-unquote kind of political bent, for lack of a better term, that it's okay to carry on like that. It's never okay to carry on like that. Some guy was removed from a JetBlue flight or a Delta flight to Allentown because he was yelling and screaming and calling Hillary Clinton bad names. He should have been removed. I don't care who you are, your ends never justify your means, and there's certain decorum that you have to follow, and it just doesn't. What they did not follow it.
This lawyer who was screaming at Ivanka Trump, Daniel Jennings Goldstein is his name, said to the flight crew, Richard, why is she on our flight? She should be flying private. Now, here you get so many people who criticize the Trumps or others, for always living in the rarefied air of private jets and that kind of thing. Here she is on a JetBlue flight with her family, and she gets verbally accosted.
Right. Look, listen. The airline or being on the plane, especially post 9/11, is not the place where you are able to express your First Amendment like you would normally do out in, let's say, the public walking down the street. There is a safety and security concern that's primary and utmost what the airline has to deal with. And you can't make people feel uncomfortable on a plane. He certainly should have been removed. Look, the Delta is not the federal government, and therefore your First Amendments don't apply. You're trumped by safety and security concerns, and certainly he should have been removed because he was causing a disruption. He was making people feel uncomfortable. And again, you don't want to have the disruption 30,000 feet in the air. Then what are you going to do?
To her credit, Ivanka Trump apparently just ignored the whole hubbub. This guy, Daniel Jennings Goldstein, and his husband,
who was tweeting her position during the whole thing. I mean, talk about security issues.
But she did go on to get onto a private flight after she landed. So
well, they were bragging about it on Twitter, and then since this publicity erupted, they have both deleted their Twitter accounts. Apparently,
good idea.
They're not so proud now of what happened.
And they should be. They should not be.
Richard St. Paul, Fred Tisi, Merry Christmas to both of you.
Merry Christmas, John. Thanks for having me. Take care.
It's been a couple of rough days for travelers out of Los Angeles with hundreds of delays and canceled flights because of that weather that Laura was just talking about and some other problems. Gridlock is not exclusive to LA, especially this time of year. Today is one of the busiest travel days of the year, so you will need all the patience you can muster. Here with his roadmap to navigating the craziness, Edward Pizzarello, travel expert and blogger at Pizza in Motion. Edward, thanks for being with us. What's your number one piece of advice?
Thanks for having me back on, John. Good afternoon. You know, the number one piece of advice is to be prepared and be early. The white Christmas stuff is really going to mess up the airports where there is weather. We're already at capacity in a number of airports across the country. So you want to make sure you're checked in. You want to make sure that you're double checked on where you're supposed to go. And if your flight is actually on time, don't wait for the airline to tell you that there's a problem.
The advantage we have these days is some of the apps that you can actually download to your smartphone to help you, help keep you where you're going on time. Can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, while you do want to have the app for the airline you're traveling on, that may not always be your best source. There's a number of other apps out there, Flight Track Pro, Flight Stats, where they also have that information for all different carriers, and sometimes they'll post updates on your flight before your airline app will, and it's important to have that information so you can be first in line at the counter to talk about where you need to go if there is a problem.
Let's say you're at an airport and your flight gets canceled and they say, absolutely no chance of getting you on another flight for the next 24 hours. What are you supposed to do?
Yeah, that's a tough one. All these flights are so highly filled right now, capacity maximum. The problem with LAX and those first few flights that got canceled is a snowball effect where you may not be able to get on a flight for a couple days. You've got to be creative at that point, and maybe if you're in LA and you're headed to, say, New York, think about alternate airports. Is there another place you can go to get out of the weather pattern, maybe reposition yourself? You might not want to drive to your destination, but if you can get within a couple of hours of where you need to go, rather than missing out on Christmas or Hanukkah with your family, getting close enough and driving that last leg may be your best option.
So check out rental cars, maybe find another nearby airport that might not be so impacted by the weather or whatever it is that you're experiencing there.
Yeah, and also remember, too, if you're having a weather problem at the airport you're at, there probably are plenty of airports where there, A, aren't weather issues, and B, maybe not that sort of overcapacity. So if you can get somewhere else and reposition and then figure out where to go next, you're getting closer to your destination. But if you're sitting in an airport where there's already weather and cancellations, it's likely not to get better anytime soon.
You mentioned that airlines are very good at filling up their planes these days. It's rare, it seems like, that there's a middle seat open anymore. Tantamount with that, the frequent flyer programs, the so-called affinity programs, they don't seem to have the perks that they used to have.
No, they don't. And I'll tell you, as much as I travel as a business traveler, I've ended up in a lot of those middle seats this year. When you're buying those tickets at the last minute and planes are full, there's a lot of sameness between the big carriers. And the strategy right now is to see if you can focus your efforts with one carrier to get to a higher level of status. Those lower levels of status are significantly diluted in that you can get something as simple as a credit card to get most of those benefits, where before you'd have to fly 25,000 or 50,000 miles with that airline to get something like a free check bag or priority boarding. Now they're reserving the really good benefits for those that spend $25,000 a year or more.
So Affinity credit cards with one of the airlines, that's one of your recommended means to continue to fly and fly comfortably?
If you're not going to have a lot of travel, those Infinity credit cards are definitely going to help you get through a lot of different passageways. I think the big key, too, is if you are a business traveler with a lot of miles on the road, you want to try and focus on one program. Those top-level elite still get great benefits, and we'll call it the top 1%, if you will. They still get great benefits, but they're very hard to achieve, and trying to split that between two airlines is going to be much more painful. So I definitely lean on get the highest status you can with one airline by focusing as much flying as you can there, and then strategically put a credit card in your wallet that helps you get the other benefits that you need, whether that's lounge access or free checked bags, so that you're ready for a backup scenario if you can't get there on your primary airline.
Edward Pizzarello, travel expert, Pizza in Motion. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, John.
Well, the American Heart Association publishing a new study on holiday health concerns. The research confirms an uptick in heart-related deaths over Christmas and New Year's, but removes cold weather as a possible factor. So since the data comes from New Zealand, where it's warm in December, this is, of course, very interesting. We want to bring in Dr. Tiffany Sizemore. She's an internist, board-certified cardiologist, and women's health expert. Thanks for being here. This is such an important subject matter for anybody who has had heart disease in their family, and I know a lot of our viewers have. So, we want to talk about what are some of the contributing factors to this stat when that study talks about taking out the cold factor.
So what we do know is these patients that have the higher heart attack statistics, really, and we say wintertime for us because it is our wintertime. Sure. These patients typically do have more risk factors to begin with. So they have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, they're smokers. But what we know is that it's just an increased amount of stress over the holiday season. Emotional stress, physical stress, taking the bags to and from the car, up in the north, shoveling the snow. But really, it's the emotional stress behind everything. It's having the family over, getting the house ready. Right. And stress does increase blood pressure. It increases heart rate, so it increases heart attack risk.
Lack of sleep, too. Lack of sleep. Lack of sleep doesn't help. We talked about that as mothers of young children. And the age range of these deaths in this study are a little surprising. We're seeing that the age has come down a little bit, younger adults.
A little younger. And we see that kind of on Wall Street, too. We see these kind of powerful late 30s, early 40s men having these massive heart attacks. And again, it has to do with stress.
Right. And a lot of people, of course, can probably relate to some information in this that, you don't exercise as much, you're eating and drinking a little bit more. Yeah. Sure. I mean, so we all do it, right? And now the advice would be, okay, well, get out, start moving, and don't eat as much. But it's hard to do. So what's your motivational advice as a cardiologist?
Keep it in the back of your mind that it's possible that bad things happen to good people. I never tell my patients they can't have something. It's just everything in moderation. So, have your glass of wine, don't have 6.
Yeah. Okay. And let's talk about the warning signs. I think that is absolutely key because we were talking just before we went on camera about how people don't want to raise alarm. It's Christmas. Oh, I feel a little funny. I don't want to say anything. I'm over at my family's house and I don't want to cause a problem. Right. But there are definitely warning signs.
I tell my patients, trust your gut. If your gut tells you something's wrong, something's typically wrong. So obviously chest pain is the big predominating symptom, but a lot of times just an overriding nausea, feeling very tired for no reason. Granted, if you didn't sleep the night before, it's one thing, but feeling extraordinarily fatigued for no reason, jaw pain, arm pain, for really no reason. But what it really boils down to is it's your gut feeling. If something's not right, call 911 and go to the hospital. Right. Because time is heart.
Time is hard. And you had said that this is the busiest time for you.
Hands down, busiest time. I'm on call the 26th and I'm on call the 31st. Right. So I'm going to be very busy.
It's really that much of an increase for you?
It is. It is. And heart attacks, statistically, number 1 day of the year is Christmas Day. Second is the day after Christmas. Third is January 1st.
Very important information. Thank you for being here to share that with us. That's Tiffany Sizemore.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you.
All right. Time for the the final 30. I'm reading ahead of myself. A child's missing teddy bear gets home for the holidays after a grand tour of the Detroit airport.
Okay, this is so great. It all began when a little girl accidentally left her best friend behind. A worker there searched for the stuffed animal and found it on top of a garbage can. The worker took pictures of the bear all around the airport, including perched on this jet engine.
And of course, a photo in the cockpit is absolutely mandatory. Eventually, the teddy bear did make it back home to one very grateful little girl. We just love happy endings.
I mean, this is like Flat Stanley, but even better.
Way better.
Thank you for joining us. America's News Headquarters starts for you right now. Have a
Merry
great
Christmas.